Hello and welcome to this Faculty of Music question and answer session. I hope you can hear us. If you're joining us and you can put a message in the chat so that you can hear us, that would be very helpful. We're delighted you can join us today. Sorry you can't be here in person, that we can't welcome you in person on this occasion, but we hope you'll enjoy this session and find it useful. And I'm going to start just asking our panelists to introduce themselves, just to say a few words. Katharine, may we start with you?
Yeah, hello everybody out there. I'm Katharine Ellis. I rejoice in the title of 1684 Professor of Music, which basically means that somebody stumped up the cash in 1684 to decide that music was a really worthwhile subject, which of course we all know it is. I'm also chair of the Faculty of Music at the moment. And when I'm not doing all of that, I'm an historian and I specialize in the music and musical life of France in the period from around the post-revolutionary period to right up to the Second World War.
Your mute has come on. Would you mind unmuting? Okay, Sam, over to you.
Thank you. Yes. Hello, my name is Sam Barrett. I'm a lecturer here in the Faculty of Music. I specialise in early music, but also in jazz. I'm Director of Undergraduate Study at the moment at the Faculty of Music. So I'm in charge of delivering the undergraduate courses, making sure they run smoothly. I'm also Director of Study at a college, at Pembroke College. And I've had various experiences as an organ scholar and a choral scholar in my time.
Can I just ask, are you getting feedback from my my screen? Are you hearing me more than once? No? Okay, great. Will, over to you.
Hello all, my name is Will. I've just finished doing my undergrad here studying at Queen's College. My main interests were in sort of late 19th, earliest 20th century analysis, but I also dabbled in a few other things, especially in my final year. And I've had a great time being involved in loads of music here. I was the student president of the University Musical Society and have had a great time sort of doing lots of playing and conducting during my time at the university. That's me.
Georgia.
Hi, I am Georgia. I've just finished my first year and I'm also at Queen's, so there are other colleges available, I promise. I am still kind of working out what my main interests are, but currently they lie around kind of discussions of gender in the 19th century and around kind of popular music. Obviously both quite different, but yeah, that's me.
Great, thank you very much. So those of you who've joined us, if you'd like to put your questions into the chat, we'll start taking those as soon as we've had the first one. In the meantime, we're just going to start with a question that we get asked very often, which is that are there certain colleges at Cambridge that you would recommend for studying music? Who would like to take that? Katharine, should we go with you?
By all means. I think there are so many different kinds of culture within Cambridge colleges that I think I would say really do your research and think about what the musical societies at particular colleges look like, the kinds of music that are represented and whether they really fit in with your interests. But don't forget that although you're going to have a community as a member of a college, And although during COVID, those memberships of colleges have become very restricted, the normal undergraduate experience is to spread right the way across. And so I'm going to avoid this question a little bit by saying, and pass it back to you by saying, I think the websites and the alternative prospectus and the Facebook groups that are available will give you an insight into the culture of colleges, but take the time. Don't rush into thinking, oh, it has to be this college because I see them on the television. I'm not going to name a college, but you know, don't rush to those sorts of conclusions, because there's a lot of variety out there.
Thank you. Would any of the rest of you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, the main thing I'd add, and I completely agree with everything that Katharine has said, is that upon arriving here, pretty much every person I've ever met, as I say, pretty much every person I've ever met within a couple of weeks of being at the university is convinced that their college is the right place to be, which is, everyone's laughing because they also know this is the case. You will end up being happy because all the colleges, they have their own quirks and they're all slightly different, but they're all brilliant in their own right, and you will be happy with each and every single one of them.
Fantastic. Thank you, Will. We have a question for the two of you, Will and Georgia, about what drew you to the music course at Cambridge in particular.
I'm happy to go first if you want. It's probably a bit more recent for me. I knew I wanted to study music at university, and I knew I wanted to study in kind of like a highly academic institution. You know, my grades were high enough for Cambridge and Oxford, as I'm sure many of yours are as well. So then it was kind of picking between the Cambridge and Oxford course. And there's nothing more complex in that I like Cambridge as a place more. And the course appealed to me slightly more, but I can't really give a reason for that. It was kind of just gut feeling, which I think a lot of people get when applying to universities. It's just like it just kind of feels right, and the place feels right. And if you read through the course, it looks like it appeals to you. So that's why I chose the Cambridge music course.
Thank you. And how about you, Will?
Yeah, so I was potentially slightly less direct, because until around this time of the year when I was in year 12, I was convinced that I was going to do engineering or physics or something down those lines. And then I sort of had an epiphany over the summer between year 12 and 13, where I realized I was really passionate about studying music, and how sort of diverse what constitutes music as an academic subject is, how it's so multidisciplinary. And that really intrigued me. And then I had a decision to make between coming to an academic institution or purely academic like Cambridge or conservatoire. I was a violinist and pianist. And eventually I decided that Cambridge was, for similar reasons to Georgia, was the right place for me, because just the course itself really intrigued me. I love the city, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thank you. Just going back to the question of colleges just for a moment, as we have covered a lot of performance in yesterday's Q&A, but we do have a quick question about which college is best for an instrumentalist who enjoys performing Western classical music. I think it's fair to say that any college is fine, because a lot of music takes place across the university. But would you like to just say something quick about that, Sam?
Yes, I mean, it's certainly true. As you said, any college would fulfill your needs for performing Western classical music. Absolutely. I think I would just point to maybe a slight difference. If you look at the size of certain colleges, the number of music students in them, I think there is a difference in experience there. So that if you're at a college where there may be 5 or 6 music students per year, so you'd be one of between 15 and 18, then you take your place within something that's already going on. If you're at a college where there's maybe just 2 music students a year, and so you're one of maybe 6, then there's far more opportunities for you to be the leader and to be involved in absolutely everything. So it's a question of whether you see yourself how you see yourself, whether you want a big community of other music students, whether you want a really, really very active and quite public sometimes profile of some music societies, or whether you're looking for something that's more inward looking for the colleges. There are slight differences there, and I think you can pick up the sense of that from reading on the college websites, but the fundamental point remains that the vision for instrumental tuition and education and performance spaces are there across the colleges.
Thank you. We do have a question about hours of instrumental tuition. How many are received each year throughout the course as a music student?
Okay. Sam, do you want to take that as Director of Undergraduate Studies?
We don't so much specify the number of hours. There is a guaranteed sum for those who take music performance in the tripos, i.e. take it as part of their performance, as an exam, as part of their year, and that's an option in years 1, 2, and 3. But if you choose to do it, there's a guaranteed sum that you'll be given towards your lessons. And that's in the region of 400 and something in the first year, 500 and something in the second, and it is near to 700 by the time you get into the third year. On top of that, individual colleges may provide you with further support, either in that instrument or in another instrument, and that will then depend on the funds available within the college. So every student starts from this baseline should they choose to do performance as part of their exams in any given year. If you don't, there's still opportunities to support your instrumental tuition, but that will be then dependent on your individual college. All of them will support it to some level. A typical arrangement is for a college to pay around about 50% of costs up to a certain amount. Let's say 50% up to £400 a year or something. There's a slight variation across the colleges, but it's basically that.
Thank you. Talking about specific instrumental skills, we have a question about piano skills and how necessary they are if you're already doing music A level and playing an instrument. Did you want to take that as well, Sam?
I can start, and I'm sure the music students will have something to add to this.
Yes.
So I'll give you the official line, which is correct, which is that actually until we now have a new tripos. So if you were previously taking our degree, then yes, there were quite severe, stringent keyboard tests. They were still there, and we were recommending you be at least grade 6 in order to do these around about grade 5, grade 6. That would really help you through those tests. That's really shrunk now because we are looking to test people's musical abilities in our new tripos, which is going to start next year, in a whole range of manners. And we include sight singing, we include rhythm, we include conducting. So those practical tests are less. Now, I think it's still beneficial to have some keyboard skills because your ability to read scores, the ability to check things out for yourself is important. I think it's not absolutely essential, but I think it is important. And again, even if you're around about grade 5 or grade 6, that would be enough to do that kind of basic checking. But it's no longer as fundamental as it was.
Thank you. Will and Georgia, would you like to add anything?
I can only agree with Sam. As the degree that I took when I started 3 years ago was slightly different now, so I can't answer any better than Sam can for now.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to work down chronologically with these questions. So the next one is about composition. Should applicants submit a composition portfolio when applying? And is it useful to have a wide variety of styles composed? Who would like to take this one?
Well, I can take this one.
Thank you.
I mean, if composition is something that is really of interest to you, then obviously sending in something as part of your portfolio is going to be really useful. But I wouldn't do that without putting in the harmony and the chorale or whatever harmony exercise you want to put in as well, and written work. So it might be that it's one component, but I wouldn't sacrifice something else to put it in. And so it might not be possible to put in a wide range of styles. It might be best really to put in something that you feel speaks nicely to what you say in your personal statement, so that there's a talking point at interview. And in many ways, what you submit will form part of the talking points at interview. So you can expect to be have teased apart, you know, what it was that was special about this particular composition, why you chose it, why you chose to write in that particular style, why you did the word setting as you did if you've chosen something texted. So I would think about it holistically as part of a package that is a catalyst for a conversation at interview.
Thank you. Georgia, as it's a little bit more recent for you, can you give us an idea of what sort of work you submitted?
Yes, so I submitted an analysis essay that I'd done about one of my A-level set works. And I also submitted, I think, 2 Bach chorales. It was either 1 or 2. And if it was 2, I did a major and a minor one. It was all just classwork I'd done. It was nothing kind of extra that I'd written. You know, I think someone will have to correct me if I'm wrong, but the faculty or your college like work that's marked generally. So I was told my teachers, "Oh, just take another look at this. Can you do a bit more detailed marking?" And then I sent it in. But no, it was no like extra work on a topic that I hadn't covered in A-level.
Thank you. Actually, on that subject, so could we talk about the general requirements in the application process for what students should send in? Is there anything beyond submitted essays and compositions that we haven't mentioned that applicants should be sending in? Sam?
Take this one. Yes. There's a general pattern across the colleges, which is that they will ask you for some writing that you've done on music, so an essay, 1 or 2 usually, and some technical exercises, something to do with harmony and counterpoint that you've done. And most music students, or most people applying to do music, have something in those areas. I quite often get asked at my individual college, well, I've got 1 essay on music, but I haven't got 2, and then they quite often send an essay in another subject, and that's absolutely fine. I sometimes get asked and say, well, we haven't done harmony and counterpoint training as part of our A-level music. Can I send in something else? And then I simply have a discussion. So in most colleges, you'll find that is the norm. And then even if you haven't got that work available, you can then have a discussion through the admissions office. It usually happens through there, but you find out more information, and almost every college will be flexible and say, yes, you can submit some other kind of work. And it's usually then common for compositions to be optional, as was discussed here. So you can submit it or you cannot, it's up to you. And then there are some other small varieties between colleges, but this basic framework is an agreed framework across the whole piece.
Thank you. Katharine, did you want to add anything about submitted work? Any interesting work that you've seen submitted that's made a difference?
I think the most impressive work that comes in is work where the voice of the student really comes through, where it's very clear that the student has done some reading, done some listening, knows the music, and often the work that is most impressive can sometimes lie slightly outside the curriculum. It can be where somebody's taken a particular essay question and has said, well, actually, I want to deal with it like this, rather than the very often very standard ways that that A-level essays are couched. So trying to, if you've got something that has a spark of creativity in it, that just, you know, was something that really inspired you, and it came through in the writing and in the researching of that essay, then that's the one that I would pick, and that's, I think, what I would look for in terms of what you submit.
Thank you. So moving on to the interview process, for those who are offered interviews, what sort of tests would they be doing, and how do the interviews work, and how do they differ online than in person? Sam, would you like to? Okay,
I'll provide a general framework first, and I'm sure then other people can add in around it. So the normal pattern is at colleges these days is to have 2 interviews. One would be more focused on talking words about music, essentially, So you might be talking about your interests, you might be talking about some submitted work that you've done. You might be asked to respond to a passage that's given you an unseen passage, say 30 minutes before. So one interview concentrating on talking about music, and then a quite normal pattern would be to have a second interview, which then concentrates on notes and your ability to handle notes in whatever form. So you have a more technical, if you like, interview. And that might then come from the harmony test that you've done and submitted. It might come from just talking about some pieces you mentioned in a more technical way. It might come from being given an unseen score that you're then asked to talk about. So that's however that sort of slightly varies between colleges, that sort of words about music and a technical understanding of music. Now we recognize that people have different backgrounds, especially on the technical side. So we always just start where they are and then see and explore around that and see how far we can go with things and see what direction they want to go in and what language they're using as well, because it does differ. So that's where we start from. It's rare now. Well, of course, I think the interviews are online, aren't they? I forget that's correct. Yeah. So there won't be performance. There won't be any form of keyboard tests. I very much doubt there'll be oral tests, so you have to look at that for the individual college. It's much more now down to these discursive situations, talking words about music and technical understanding of music.
Thank you. How was your interview experience, Will and Georgia? Is there anything that took you by surprise in the interviews, Will?
Yeah, so my interview experience was an in-person interview when I did it, however many years ago. And the scenario was much as Sam describes. Those of us who were interviewing, we all sat down and we had to do sort of a technical exercise first, which I believe was spotting mistakes in a Bach chorale. And then we had to do another counterpoint exercise. I can't remember off the top of my head. And then we were given a short passage, which we were allowed to read during the sort of that assessment period, which then they came back to during the actual interview itself. We only had one interview, but as Sam described, it was very much split between discursive, historical ideas and technical, how do you deal with notes? But for me, at least, it was as one interview. In terms of do I think anything surprised me? I would say no, not necessarily, but the best thing is to go in and enjoy yourself. I remember really enjoying myself in the interview process itself, because it's a really great chance to talk to some really very, very intelligent people about something that they're as equally passionate as you are. So that would be my biggest thing, is just go and enjoy it, even if it's a scary thing. They're not looking to trick you, and they just want to see how you think and how your brain works, essentially.
That's a really important point, isn't it? That the interviews are not designed to catch you out. Yeah. They're really designed to give you the opportunity to show how you think, what you know, and perhaps how you respond if you don't know, how you can have a discussion on a particular subject. Georgia, is there anything that you can tell us about your interview experience?
I had a very similar experience to Will, because we're both at the same college. So I don't, but there is lots more variation around Cambridge. Some will have some quick pre-interview assessment. Some will have 2 interviews. So I, like Will, just had one. I think it went on for about an hour. And there was, a split between kind of more kind of historical discussion and then kind of looking at a score, talking through like, what tonality is this section? And questions like that. The thing that surprised me the most, I think, was how led the questions were by my interests. So I remember my current director of studies who interviewed me, he asked, what's the last piece of music you listened to? And then we discussed that and the artist who'd kind of written that. And it was a more modern piece of music. We probably discussed that for about 20 minutes. So it isn't always going to be, what year was Beethoven born or something like that. They'll often be very led by your interests, which makes it a very enjoyable experience as well. And
that ties in quite closely with the personal statement as well, in terms of your interest, isn't it? Which we can come to later. But just a quick question, just going back to the work that's submitted beforehand. What is the deadline for submitting the essays and technical exercises, and does it depend on each college? Sam, do you?
Yes, it depends. In my experience, it depends on the college, and they will give you a deadline in the autumn for this, sort of midway through the autumn, or be midway through your autumn term. There can be some flexibility about that if you're really struggling to meet that deadline, but we have an absolute cut-off time, of course, which is about a week or so before the interviews, because we have to be able to get it and to read it. So the deadline varies a little between colleges. I mean, I'm hesitating slightly here, but I've always sort of received these things in the middle of the autumn term.
Thank you. One more question on sort of applications before we move on to course content, which is about auditions. For music students, which colleges are students required to do auditions for? Who would like to answer this one?
I will say something here, but others may chip in. The number of colleges that have auditions, is this for the course, just to clarify? Is this as part of the interview
Yes,
process?
it does say for music students. Yeah. So for those
the number of colleges where there's live music performance as part of the interview is going down every year. I can simply say that. So that it's actually rather rare now to have live performance in interview, and of course with the move to online, this is going to be more difficult. Certainly the view has shifted over time that whatever you've done previously is a much better guide to your performance standard. So if you've been in your county orchestra, if you've been on stage at various venues, if you've won Folk Musician of the Year or something, then that's a pretty good guide to your standard, and it's actually a better guide to your standard of performance than whatever happens in a 5-minute situation that's slightly uncomfortable, may not be the best performance situation. So that's increasingly recognised. So that's all I can say for now, that very small numbers colleges do insist.
Thank you. Let's just move on to some questions about the course content. Can I study jazz music as part of the course? Well, the short answer is yes, but would anyone like to expand on that?
Sam, I think this is another one for you.
This is my area. So yes, you can do jazz music as part of the course, and it's done in a couple of different ways. So it features as part of a first-year paper that we have called Music in Contemporary Societies, which is looking at a range of different musics actually across the world, but really looking at now, and it features as part of that. So to give an example, I gave a lecture on jazz as part of that series last time, and students could answer on that in the exam. I've taught course on Miles Davis. I've taught courses on jazz in general. So it also might appear as a specialist topic, but those specialist topics naturally change. It also appears as part of our practical test now. So in the first year, you can take a jazz option in terms of your ability to play over a standard, sort of standard or a ballad. That exists as part of an option. It also exists sort of writing. We were asking students newly this year to actually write a popular song of the sort of 1920s, 1930s, and the students who have come from a jazz background, they found that harmonic language easy to deal with because that was part of their expectations. We're looking towards including a course in our second year level on improvisation and providing structured teaching in different improvisation traditions, but that's something we're very much thinking about, but it's a direction in which we're heading.
Thank you. Will and Georgia, have you done any jazz as part of your course?
I haven't explicitly. I took a course with Katharine in my second year, actually, which was on Jazz Age Paris, which I imagine the type of jazz that you're thinking of as the question is perhaps a slightly different jazz to that which Katharine taught. But that was as close as I got to jazz. But then I as I said, was a violinist and pianist. So jazz has never really been part of my musical diet, but if it is, as Sam points out, then there are opportunities for that.
I studied a bit of jazz as part of kind of the first year contemporary music course, which Sam lectured on. So I've done a bit, and I'm hoping to do a bit more over the next couple of years, but I'm not quite sure where.
Thank you, Katharine. It'd be interesting to hear just a little bit more about the jazz course that you were teaching with Will.
Well, this was really, it wasn't a misnomer, but it was Music in Jazz Age Paris, So the jazz age bit is thinking about 1920s Paris or post-war Paris, and just the swirl of styles that form part of that period in Paris, when you had an influx of Black musicians from the United States and all sorts of assumptions about what America was and what kinds of threats and excitements it might bring both to popular music and to art music. And it was that melting pot that we were really looking at, everything from Josephine Baker and the Banana Dance to Mio and jazz ballet with primitive African dance represented on stage, with costumes that were basically too heavy to carry, and which made dancers into moving scenery. So that whole spectrum was really what we were looking at. But I think Sam wanted to come in on something to do with the curriculum.
I wanted to make one other quick point, which is that I had a student whose main interests were jazz a couple of years ago, and he managed to do 5 out of his 6 final papers related to jazz. So there's a lot of freedom in the course. He did a dissertation on jazz, he did a notation portfolio on jazz, he did an analysis portfolio on jazz. He then did a popular music course, and then he did a course we call Decolonizing the Ear, where he talked about jazz music in that. There's only one paper which he didn't manage to skew towards jazz. Now, that's representative of the flexibility of the course in general, so that people can bring their musical interest. And there's a lot of papers, portfolio papers, where you can choose to work in that area.
We should mention at this point that Cambridge terminology is slightly different, and to some universities, a paper is a module. So you can choose different modules within the faculty. And am I right in saying you can also borrow papers or modules from other faculties?
That's not the case yet, but we're working on it. It's something that the university is becoming much more open to. It's logistically problematic because of the complexity of the degree that we provide. But at the moment, we're in a situation where some people manage to borrow from us, but we find it very difficult to borrow from them. So at the moment, the answer is no, but the answer is also watch this space.
On that subject, are there particular students from particular subject areas that tend to borrow musical papers?
Yes, there are people within who want to take the papers that we run in music and science. So they come from education, and they come from natural sciences.
Thank you. Now, we've had a question about music technology. Do you consider students who have studied music technology at A-level rather than music if you have instrumental grades?
Sam, do you want to go for that one?
I'll try that one, yes. So there are 2 routes into the music degree, officially speaking: the music A-level, i.e. not the music technology, and the ABRSM grade 8 music theory. Those are the standard routes into the degree. Others can be considered on an individual basis. And there are, of course, differences for Scottish Highers and for people in different countries who've taken different qualifications. So the music technology wouldn't by itself be taken as a preparation for the degree. And that's partly because of the nature of the degree we're taking here, where although it would include music technology sort of tangentially in certain courses, that's not a primary object of study. Of course, if you have it and you've also done music A-level, or you've also done grade 8 music theory, then that is to your benefit. But as a standalone qualification for entry to the degree, at the moment, no.
Thank you. What makes the Cambridge music degree different from other universities? This is a slightly tricky question, isn't it? But Katharine, would you like to talk about this?
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes the Cambridge degree very different is the kinds of teaching that we offer, right the way from the large face-to-face lecture, and I'm talking about the before times and what we hope are going to be the after times, the large face-to-face lecture, but most importantly, these small group supervisions that are tied to each course, and which are really a great opportunity for learning through conversation and learning through discussion, both with other students and also with an expert. And it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to bounce your ideas off somebody who's an expert in the field week after week after week. And it means that for cumulative courses, there's a relationship that develops, and you're able to work on things that are very particularly the things that you want to become stronger at. So there's a lot of individual attention to your particular trajectory that comes through the supervision system. But at the same time, you do have the larger lectures, and more, we've learnt from the pandemic, and we're looking to see what we can take from online learning that is most useful to work in tandem with those two face-to-face models, so that we have ways of learning that are best suited to the particular course that is being taught. But I would come back to the supervision system, which is a real jewel, and which most other universities simply are not in a position to offer.
Thank you. Can I ask you, Will, how supervisions have worked for you during your time in Cambridge, where they've generally taken place, and how many people would there normally be in a supervision?
Yes, so the number of people in the supervision will often depend on preference of the supervisor / nature of the subject. So for example, a lot of my harmony and counterpoint studies in first year were all done individually. So I'd have half an hour on harmony and half an hour on counterpoint individually, I think every week. Some other subjects you have slightly more, just because if it's a history paper, for example, one of the best ways to learn, personally, I think, is through discussion. And therefore, up to a certain upper limit, the more people there are, you have more interesting discussion, you have more viewpoints. Generally, Katharine or Sam might say otherwise. Supervisions end up a maximum of about 4, normally 3 though, so 3 students and 1 supervisor.
And how about you, Georgia? Is there anything you would add to that?
No, I think my experience has been probably very similar to Will. Harmony and counterpoint and kind of more practical skills is often done one-on-one, and then for kind of the more essay-based, like discussion based papers, they tend to be a little bit larger. I think normally they'd all happen in person, but lots of them have been on Zoom this year. But no, there's been a good mix. The music faculty have enabled more in-person supervisions than some other subjects have managed to. So yeah, that was good.
And in normal times, when they're not all taking place virtually, where would the majority of supervisions take place? Would they generally be in your college?
So it depends. Often it will be either in the faculty or often in the college of individual supervisors, if they have rooms within the college which they have access to, but it really does depend on supervisors. But either in a college or somewhere in the faculty is most likely.
Thank you. This actually leads us on quite nicely to a question about how important it is that your interests are similar to those of the fellows at your college. Katharine, would you like to talk about this?
I think when you go for interview, you're going to get a real sense as to whether your own interests are something that fires the person you're speaking to. And it might be worthwhile as part of your research, just looking around to see what all of us work on, and just to get a sense of what it is that fires us up. But so much of the teaching that is done by other specialists. So and actually I'd be very interested to know the proportion, Will and Georgia, of teaching that you've had from people who are based at Queen's, because, you know, I think probably the experience of many students is that they are taught by people from all over the place, depending upon their expertise. And so from that perspective, it's less important to have some kind of perfect matchmaking going on at this particular point. Than it is simply to realize that there is a friendly face, and that face is going to be helping you and supporting you and getting you the right specialist tuition from across the entire university, which is really what their job is to do in support of undergraduates.
Georgia, does that reflect your experience?
Yes, so I studied 6 papers this year, and only one of them was taught by a fellow from Queen's. The other ones were taught, I think, someone from Homerton, someone from Christ, someone from Selwyn, someone who isn't even based in a college. So yeah, there's a real mix. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So we have a question now about opportunities to study ethnomusicology. Concerned with more modern approaches. Approaches such like media studies and gender studies. Would students have this kind of opportunity?
I can take that. The answer is yes. There is ethnomusicological content within music and in contemporary societies, actually as part of thinking in a more decolonial way about everything that we do. There is much less of a sense of division within the faculty between things that might count as ethnomusicology and things that might not. So there's a lot of opportunity, and there is more opportunity even within some of the history papers to begin thinking in some of these sorts of ways, and that will increase for the first year that is going to be coming in this October. But in terms of the media studies aspect, we're talking about this right now, actually. We're talking particularly about how we examine certain courses and the link between ethnomusicology and the making of podcasts, for instance, as a way of displaying your skill as an ethnomusicologist. These things are things that we're talking about right now as ways of responding to new ideas in how to do assessment and how to ensure that there's real diversity of assessment depending upon what each course needs. But there's opportunity to do ethnomusicology in all 3 years, I think is the best way of putting this, and to do it in very much the way that Sam says as well, because in the first year there is an extended essay option which could be ethnomusicological. In the second and third years there is the dissertation option which could also be ethnomusicological and which could stand alongside a taught course in ethnomusicology. So there are various ways of molding the course to fit that particular interest.
Will and Georgia, do you have anything to add on that? Is it something you've studied?
I've studied a bit of it as part of kind of the compulsory first year courses, but as Katharine said, there's kind of opportunities to take it up in dissertation in second or third year. And there are also taught courses offered on it. So there's lots of opportunity to study it.
Great. While we're still on papers, are there any papers on the psychology of music?
Yes. Yes is the answer to that. There is a paper in the second year which is a very broadband introduction to music and science. And then there is a paper in the third year, which is very specifically on the psychology of music. Now that is one, it is not one that will run necessarily every year, but it has run very, very regularly. And at the moment, I can't see that there would be a reason not to continue that.
Great. Thank you. So we've a lot of the remaining questions are actually about performance in one other element of performance. So I'm just going to take the last couple of questions which are non-performance related. What are the general thoughts for a music student on taking a gap year? Sam, would you like to talk about that?
I think it really depends on what you're doing on the gap year, to be honest, from my experience. So I've had students who've taken it and very successfully gone off and done some very interesting things, and then used that as something that's come into their degree. It's clearly something they were passionate about before they went on this gap year. They then went to another country or were involved in a particular music scene, and then that's really sort of formed their interests, and they've taken that up more when they've gone into the music degree itself. But my bottom line would be, as a director of studies, would be wanting to know, well, what are your plans to do in this gap year, and is this what's the reasons for it? You know, what are you trying to do? That really depends. If it's, I mean, there could be good financial reasons for just simply taking a job, and that's perfectly acceptable as well. But I'll be interested in that. So I said there's certainly nothing against it. There can often be a lot for it.
Can you think of any examples of gap years that music students have taken?
Okay, so the last one I was thinking immediately about was somebody who went on a kibbutz, and that he then talked about aspects of this actually in one of his first year papers, and somebody who'd been inside that scene and then talked about this was really fascinating to read about.
Great, thank you. Will and Georgia, can you describe a typical day? So lectures, tutorials, independent study, essay writing, if there is such a thing as a typical day. Will, can we start with you?
That's a really tough question, because I think the simple answer is no, there's no such thing as a typical day. At least that's what I found. You know, you have X number of hours a week in it on sort of taught courses, be that lectures, supervisions. I wouldn't know off the top of my head exactly what it comes to. Katharine or Sam might be able to put an exact number on that. And, you know, there are some things as well for your independent study. I think it goes without saying that the course here is sort of academically rigorous, and that means you do have to put time in outside of your taught courses to do your own independent study and write essays and do exercises and read. That doesn't mean by any stretch, I think there's a misconception often of people applying that they're going to spend their lives waking up at 8 in the morning, going to the library and spending the day in the library until they go to bed in the evening. The experience I've had in my 3 years at Cambridge, that's certainly not true. And there's a lot of time left in your day to be able to enjoy other aspects of Cambridge and university life that exist outside of your degree, if they're related to the degree. For example, you're interested in singing, performing your instruments, etc. That's great. That was a really long way of saying, no, I don't think there is a typical day.
Georgia, would you agree with that?
I would. I'd say very broadly. Obviously, I also haven't had a particularly normal kind of first year, so this is kind of rough and what I've heard from other people. But you might have like one lecture in the morning, you then might do some work in a library or maybe in a cafe with some friends. You'll then have kind of 1 or 2 supervisions in the afternoon. You'll fit in maybe some essay writing or some harmony exercises around that. And then you might either spend the evening doing a little bit more work, but you might, you know, perform 8 times a week in a chapel choir, or you might perform 2 times a week in a chapel choir. Or I've got friends who row every day of the week and fit that in around their music degree. What I've enjoyed particularly about music is because of its kind of relatively low contact hours compared to a subject like natural sciences, there is lots of flexibility to fit in the things that you want to do around the degree, and you can really kind of shape your time in Cambridge. So, you know, if you want to, I don't know, be a varsity sports person, there is time for that. But if you want to spend all your time singing in chapel choirs, there's also room for that as well. So yeah, it hugely varies also depending on kind of the time in the term and whether there's concerts going on or maybe you're performing in a show or something. But yeah, there is no typical day as well as well.
Thank you. And we can come on to a few of those activities, those musical performance activities shortly. But we did just have one question about the difference between studying performance at Cambridge and in a conservatory. Sam, would you like to answer?
Okay, so for students who are thinking about this, who are weighing this up, so they're obviously advanced instrumental students or perhaps vocal in whatever area. So what we like to say is that we offer a bit of the best of both worlds. So that if you're a singer, there's obviously incredibly high standard of choirs here. If you're an instrumentalist, there are various schemes that we run. So as well as the top orchestras, where we have a lot of National Youth Orchestra players coming in, and that sort of all very top county orchestra players coming in and joining with professional conductors coming in, we have the instrumental awards scheme, which is bringing professional chamber musicians coming in to coach the best chamber musicians in the university. Now, these kind of schemes and others go on throughout. So it's having this professional coaching in whatever domain of performance you're involved in. This happens at Cambridge at that kind of organized level from the center, but also within colleges. They have their own schemes and their own professional visiting musicians of various traditions meeting people. And one very popular model is to come and do that at Cambridge. And we think, we have to be honest here and say, I think we do put a lot of time and effort into this, and we take it very, very seriously, this performance aspect in and around the curriculum. And a popular model is to come and do that, and then to go on to do a master's at a conservatoire. That is, a lot of people do consider that now, so that they really do get the music degree, that intensive, and also all the opportunities you get at a university to be involved in so many different types of things, where we're not quite so parceling out opportunities, but we do say go out and do things, and then go on to the conservatoire for the masters. There is one other scheme I want to mention, which is the CamRam scheme, which is so for those who are interested in this and who are the sort of very much the top instrumentalists or singers. There's the possibility of going to the Academy of Music and having lessons there alongside your degree.
Thank you. There was quite a bit more information about the CamRam scheme in yesterday's performance Q&A, which the recording of which will be put on the music faculty website within the next few days. So if you missed that, do take a look. Talking about the variety of ensembles, there are many, many different kinds of ensembles, aren't there? Will and Georgia, what sort of ensembles have you been involved in?
Georgia, perhaps you go first.
Yeah, mine will probably be a slightly shorter list than yours. So in Michaelmas, and it would have carried on all year if it hadn't been for the pandemic, I was playing in the University Wind Orchestra, which Will actually conducted, because I'm a saxophonist, and that was great fun. I haven't done anything else this year, but next year I'm going to be singing as a choral volunteer at Emmanuel Chapel Choir, and I will hopefully do some more playing around that as well. But yeah, Will, I'm sure you've got a very long list.
Yes, so I spent a lot of time playing in orchestras. That was something I was really passionate about before I started at university as a violinist, and then, as George has alluded already, as I spent more time in university, I got really interested in conducting as well. So that's something that I've had the chance to do a lot of during my time here too. Again, singing, and there's a lot going on. There is actually somewhere, I wouldn't know exactly where, on the website, there is another video of myself talking about the various opportunities there are for performance. So I won't repeat that video, but do go and find that one, because that will give you a wider idea of what there is going on here. Does anyone want to mention any of the other ensembles across Cambridge, because they are very varied?
Well, I can pitch in. I mean, you know, there are tens and tens of societies. Every musical genre that you might conceivably be interested in is likely to be represented. You know, George has already mentioned the wind orchestra. There's a gospel choir. There is a new music ensemble which the faculty runs. There's an early music ensemble. There are various dramatic societies that need musicians of different kinds. There's an opera society. There is a Chinese orchestra. There is the gamelan waiting to be played. You know, I could just keep going in one breath and hyperventilate at the end for you. But you know, there is so much variety, and I think that really is the beauty of it, because there's a niche, if not 2 or 3, for everybody. And you know, we are at this very moment setting up, when I say we, I mean the university, not just the faculty, but the faculty is involved in setting up a much better support structure for extracurricular music, so that we support this kind of activity at Cambridge better than we've ever done.
Thank you. And how many of the music ensembles are part of college compared with the whole university, and how much do you get to perform with students from other colleges? There's a lot of opportunities in all sorts of different colleges, and there's a lot of mixing, isn't there? Will, would you say that that's been the case for you?
Yeah, so there are some music societies. The Cambridge University Musical Society is sort of the largest, which incorporates students from across the entire university. You also don't have to be a music student, of course. There are plenty of fantastic instrumentalists who do other subjects as their degree. But then, yes, the college music societies exist as well. What each college music society does, as Sam's mentioned already, differs on different colleges. Some will be able to put on large orchestral performances on a relatively regular basis. Others perhaps don't have the resources to be able to do that quite as easily. However, you will often find that even though they call themselves college music societies, we will draw players from other colleges as well. So in short, yes, there's loads of opportunity to play with people who aren't just from your own college.
Thank you. We are nearly out of time. We've just got a couple of minutes left. So I'm going to ask the last couple of questions about performance. And whilst they're being answered, I shall put in the chat the outreach email address. If you have any unanswered questions after this session and you would like to email us, I can send those to the relevant colleagues for you. So as a percussionist, what access is there to percussion instruments?
Yeah, I can perhaps take that one on. The simple answer is, in part, it depends on your college. Your college may have access to certain percussion instruments. They may have a drum kit. They may have certain tuned instruments. However, that doesn't go for all colleges. I can say that Queen's doesn't have a glockenspiel, a marimba, etc., etc. The University Music Society does have access to these percussion instruments. And one of the things that we're currently trying to do is to set up a system in which percussionists perhaps can use those on a more regular basis for solo practice. However, this is all also part of one of the many things that the new Centre for Music Performance will be able to accommodate, is to have resources like that, which whilst individual colleges might not have access to, the CMP will. But again, that's an ongoing process which will take a while to kickstart fully.
Thank you. Before we finish, Sam, a quick question for you. Do you need grade 8 on an instrument as well as A-level music?
The quick answer is no.
Thank you. Great. Well, so there, I'm afraid we have to leave it. Thanks very much for joining us today. I hope you found it useful. As I say, if you have any further questions, do email the general outreach email address. And we wish you all the best with your decisions and applications, and we hope to see at least some of you in Cambridge in the future. Thanks then.
Bye.
Bye.